Hey folks, in this video we're going to talk about result sections in APA style for result sections. Now there are a number of specific rules and recommendations in the APA style manual about how to present statistics. And I'll show you an example of how to present the statistics here. We're also going to go over the general idea of how to write about results in this section. So, starting with some general advice, your results are going to follow a pretty standard template. There's only so many ways to describe a t-test. Okay, so if you find a template of somebody describing a t-test, and there are some out there, if you want to just Google how to describe an independent samples t-test, there are examples of how to do it. You may receive a template from me or from somewhere else on how to describe a t-test or how to describe an ANOVA. And using that template and changing things to sort of fit your own data. So you're putting your own data in there and your own um, conclusions of the data in there is perfectly fine. Okay? So you don't necessarily need to feel like working off of a template is cheating in some way. In fact, most people will describe results in a pretty similar way from one person to the next, at least when it comes to the basic statistical breakdown. Okay? But it's not just a statistical breakdown. I don't just throw t-tests at people or throw ANOVAs at people. Okay, your reader needs to be reminded why each of these tests was done. So your reader is going to get to this section and they're going to see a bunch of numbers. They need to have context to understand what these numbers mean. If you've ever tried to read a paper, you will know that you would appreciate it if they provided you context, and they don't always. Okay, so it's a lot easier to understand what's going on if you remind the reader what these tests mean. The other piece of general advice is that you're going to want to put your statistical tests, a t-test, ANOVA, correlation, whatever it is, means and standard deviations, any of those statistics. You're going to either present them in the text, so you'll write them out in the text itself, or you can present them in a table, or summary data, means and standard deviations can sometimes be presented in a figure, so it's just show it graphically instead of with the numbers. Okay? But not all three. Right? So you don't need to put the numbers in the text and in the table. That's redundant, right? How many times do I need to see your t-value and your p-value? So you're going to want to choose. Okay, so what's your approach going to be? Am I going to write out the numbers in the text, or am I going to put the numbers in the table? And that's going to depend on whether you think the reader will be able to understand it best if the numbers are available immediately, or will the reader be able to understand it best if it's broken down in a table and you describe it in words here? So think about the reader and be cognizant about what they might be able to understand. Okay, so what do you include as content here? Well, the first thing, like I said, is you're going to want to reintroduce the context. So reintroduce your questions and your hypotheses. Don't assume that your reader remembers this. So you're going to present these in the introduction. You're going to present the hypotheses ahead of time, but it's several pages down here now, and your reader might have forgotten what your specific predictions are. So you're going to want to reintroduce those. So you might say something like, first we were interested in whether condition X would perform better than condition Z. Okay? So this was our question that we had. Or it might be more of a hypothesis. First we tested the hypothesis of lower scores for condition X compared to Z using an independent samples t-test. So present what your question was if it's a little more open-ended, or what your hypothesis was here. And then now that you've represented this, your participant or your reader understands what test follows. Okay, so you're going to compare this to this. Easy enough, right? And then you'll present the statistical result. Okay. And your templates that you provided will sort of show you how to do that. And I've got a slide a couple down to show you how to do that as well. So reintroduce the question, then tell me the stat. Okay. If your results are complex, or have a lot of tests, right? So maybe you've got 6 t-tests, or you've got a big ANOVA and a bunch of follow-ups, or you've got um, 4 different outcomes and you run an ANOVA for all 4 different outcomes, right? Something like that. Then you may want to point the reader again to a table or a figure to help them really break down those results. So it's not just 2 full pages of writing out the numbers. And in which case you're going to want to refer to the table. So see table 1 for the results of all independent samples t-tests. We'll just point the reader to the table. If you don't tell them that there's a table, then they won't know to read it. And then you're going to repeat this potentially if you have more than one question, right? So you might have, depending on your study and the complexity of your study, right? I might predict that my manipulation is going to influence happiness, and that my manipulation might influence depression scores, right? If that's true, then I might have a section for happiness and present my predictions there and my results, and then a section for depression and present my predictions and results there. Okay? So that's if you have sort of a complex study, maybe with multiple outcomes or multiple questions. Okay? Oftentimes in simple studies, you might only have like 1 or 2 basic questions, and you can present them in their own section. One common issue that comes up that we're just going to hit here to make sure we're on the same page. You're going to be describing statistical significance in your paper. Make sure you're using significant as an adjective. So there was a significant effect of X on Y, or the effect of X on Y was not significant. Okay, so we're describing the effect here. The effect is the noun, and that effect can either be significant or not significant. Okay. Common error in describing statistical significance is that it gets used as a noun. So there was a significance, or while the control group performed worse than the experimental group, there was not a significance. That's just not proper usage of the term. Okay. There was not a significant effect, or not a significant difference would be appropriate. If you are embedding your statistics in text, this is how you'll do it. Okay, so keep in mind that you're not just throwing the numbers out there. You're throwing numbers out there that describe your comparison. So for total recall scores, my dependent variable in this example, the grassland survival condition, one of my conditions, and I present the mean and standard deviation for that condition. Outperform the moving control condition, I present the mean and standard deviation, and then I present the statistical result that supports that conclusion. Okay, there are rules for how to do this. So you're going to take the statistical result, your t-test, or your means and standard deviations, and you're going to separate them from the text. That can be with parentheses like this. So the grassland survival condition, parentheses, M equals SD equals, that separates it from the text with parentheses. That's just fine. Or you can do it with commas. So here we have a comma, and then the statistical result follows. The second rule is typically 2 decimal places are sufficient for describing things in psychology, like means and standard deviations of recall scores, for example, and t-values. Those are typically fine. People tend to go down to maybe 3 decimal places for p-values, since it's important that this is 0.003 instead of 0.001 or 0.008, right? That's kind of an important difference to some people. But typically 2 decimal places is sufficient for just about everything else. For your statistical symbols, like M and SD, you're going to see in this example that all of the symbols here are italicized, and that's APA style. Make sure any of those symbols are italicized. And that's going to be true whether you're putting it in the text or in your table. So make sure your tables are going to present the t-value and the p-value. Make sure those are italicized there. And then when you're presenting this result, again, don't just give me the t-value. So I found this, right? What is this comparing? So this t-test is comparing this mean to this mean. Okay, so you got to give me, again, context for what this is comparing. Here's another sort of breakdown of presenting those statistics, this time for an ANOVA result. You're always going to present the test that you ran. Again, the symbol is italicized. For an ANOVA, it's F, and so the F is italicized here. You present the degrees of freedom in parentheses like this. So your between groups degrees of freedom and your within groups degrees of freedom gets presented in parentheses. The statistical test value, our F value, followed by the p-value, and then our measure of effect size. Always presented an effect size in APA style. Okay, don't forget that effect size. We really need it. Okay, so in this case, we got an F test with 1 and 96 degrees of freedom. The F value is 1.35, which isn't very large. It's pretty close to 1. We have a p-value of 0.44, which is not significant based on our typical standards. And then we have an effect size of 0.01, which is pretty dang small. Same principle is going to apply for any test that you run. So if you run a t-test or a correlation, you present the test, the degrees of freedom in parentheses, the test statistic, the value of it, your p-value, and then your effect size. Same thing applies for our correlation. In this case, for correlation, if you remember from statistics, we don't have an effect size because the correlation itself is an effect size. Okay. As I stated earlier, if you have a lot of results or you want to offload the numbers into a table so you can focus on describing the results in words, you can include a table. Okay. Some of your statistical programs like JASP will provide tables that are pretty close to APA style, but not exactly right. So you're going to want to, you might want to take those as the basis and then make some small changes. Okay. Don't forget you're going to want to italicize your statistical symbols. You're going to want to make sure to label and number each table. So table 1 would be the first one, and then table 2. You're going to give your table a title that's meaningful. So not just table 1. So what is this? And not just like ANOVA, right? What is this describing? And down on the bottom, you have a space for notes where you can clarify anything in the table that might not be obvious. Okay. And that's the basics of presenting results in APA style. Of course, each study is going to have some slight differences in terms of how much data you have to present and the clearest way to present them. But these are some general rules that you can follow as you work on your own results sections.